Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our 30 lectures on Gibran's prophet. We are, congratulations, 1/3 of the way through as we now turn to lecture number 10 on houses. This is another longer poem as you will see. Al-Mustafa now will spend some time in the next 3 poems as the prophet speaking on, for lack of a better phrase, the economy, we might think of it this way, on maybe technology, we might think of it this way, where we're going to go from houses to clothes to buying and selling. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I want you to kind of think about these 3 poems in unison, and I also want you to think about the ways that we will draw on everything that we've done before. That leads us to assumptions. I'm hopeful that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, you'll find our playlist of the prophet. We have given a set of introductory comments I'm hopeful that you've been exposed to, and then we just finished with joy and sorrow. Now, of course, the goal, as we've seen in the previous 9 lectures, is always to keep our the spiritual ideas in spite of the fact that we're talking about market economies and the like. It's going to be difficult. Why? Because there's always this fear that technologies and the world, as it sometimes will be referred to, is going to lead to certain kind of atrophy, a spiritual atrophy, right? A giving up, a not caring. And of course the question is going to be one of peace versus comfort. This will take us back to Plato's Republic. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net if you want to run it to ground. You'll remember that in his description of the ideal state, Socrates will leave out a lot of the luxuries. And of course he's called out on this, and then he says, well, if we got luxuries, then we're going to have illnesses, and if we have illnesses, we're going to need doctors. And we're going to see something very similar. Gibran the Romantic is another way to think about it. Think about Thoreau's Walden. Think about Walt Whitman's Song of the Open Road, and that idealizing of rural or country life communities. You'll remember Thoreau says, a man is rich in proportion to the things he can live without. We've given full lectures, of course, on Thoreau's Walden and on all of Whitman's Leaves of Grass at learnstrong.net. I'll let you run those to ground. I just want to point out that Gibran himself lived, after about 1911 until his death, he lived in a 1-room apartment in New York City. So he did not live an extravagant life. So as he talks about housing and living and by extension technology, we'll be paying attention to it. Let's go ahead and read it now. Then a mason, think about it, he's a builder, right, of houses, but maybe we would argue maybe not a builder of homes. That difference between the physical and the spiritual. Then a mason came forth and said, speak to us of houses. And he answered and said, build of your imaginings a bower in the wilderness ere you build a house within the city walls. Now, think about this one. This is the back to nature. We are by nature ourselves wanderers, and we need to be out in the woods and the wilderness as opposed to living behind the city walls. So notice the dichotomy that will be created right away. For, he continues, even as you have homecomings, think about the power of the Odyssey, in your twilight, so has the wanderer in you, the ever distant and alone. In other words, we're always longing to go out so we have some place to come back to. And this will be his argument. Your house is your larger body. That's a fascinating idea. The notion, I think there was a whole lot of influence on the 20th and now the 21st century about living and where we live and feng shui and all of that idea from a passage like this. Notice, your house is your larger body. Let your living space, in other words, represent you well, will be his argument. It grows in the sun and sleeps in the stillness of the night, and it is not dreamless. And then he asks this amazing rhetorical question. That's why we love this poem, collection of poems so much. Does not your house dream, and dreaming leave the city for grove or hilltop? The power of a rhetorical question. I love this idea that your house dreams. Beautiful. Would that I could gather your houses into my hand, and like a sower scatter them in forest and meadow. Again, this romantic insight of returning back to nature. Would the valleys were your streets and the green paths your alleys, that you might seek one another through vineyards and come with the fragrance of the earth in your garments. We're going to mess around with clothes and garments in the next poem. But these things are not yet to be. We come back to Nietzsche's Madman passage when he says, not yet, not yet. In their fear, your forefathers gathered you too near together. You go back to earlier poems, that importance of spacing. Of course, the idea of fear is what leads all of us to these kinds of communes where we're all kind of living on top of each other. Go back to Plato's Republic for that idea. And here, of course, is the romantic hope. He says, and that fear shall endure a little longer. A little longer shall your city walls separate your hearths from your fields. In other words, once we've evolved, we'll be able to find our way beyond these houses that we live in to be more really free and spiritually complete in our living. And tell me, people of Orphalus, what have you in these houses, and what is it you guard with fastened doors? Notice the power of these questions, these type of rhetorical questions. Have you, right? Watch the have you questions, as we sometimes will call it. Have you peace, the quiet urge that reveals your power? Have you remembrances, the glimmering arches that span the summits of the mind? Have you beauty that leads the heart from things fashioned of wood and stone to the holy mountain? Tell me, have you these in your houses, or have you only comfort? And the lust for comfort, that stealthy thing that enters the house as a guest and then becomes a host and then a master. Now that's an amazing line. And it's, in some ways, Gibran is really pointing out the dangers of technology. Think about your cell phone, guys. You invite it in as a guest, it then becomes a host, and finally, it's kind of your master. I mean, we've sometimes asked the question, the corrosive power of technology, of all technologies have this. Can we, for example, challenge, right? Maybe you think of it as the Gibran challenge. Can you go for a week without your technologies, without that phone, without all of that, connecting? Can you live without it? And to what degree does it change the way you look at the world? Obviously, it's a Thoreau question. You'll remember when we did Walden, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, right? And we're hearing the same thing here. And it becomes a tamer. That is to say, technologies and the houses that we become so comfortable in, it becomes a tamer. And with hook and scourge makes puppets of your larger desires. It's amazing insight. In other words, our comforts, we need them. Our comforts, though, can imprison us in some difficult way. Though its hands are silken, its heart is of iron. And this idea is, of course, going to be powerful as it relates specifically to the notion of technology. All technology, in the end, has this tendency of sometimes making us, capturing us, making us weaker. Notice again, now he's talking about houses, but you can read this as technology, and many have. It lulls you to sleep only to stand by your bed and jeer at the dignity of the flesh. This is, notice, Thoreau's, we must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn that will not forsake us in our soundest sleep. You'll remember he finishes that passage by saying, I know no more encouraging fact than the unquestionability of a man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. And we live in these comfortable settings, he says, and we kind of can find ourselves going to sleep, and then the technology begins to jeer or laugh at us. Mocking is going to be the next line. It makes mock of your sound senses and lays them in thistledown like fragile vessels. We become weak, fragile. Verily, the lust for comfort murders the passion of the soul, and then walks grinning in the funeral. Man, this is some provocative language. Again, this idea of killing and the murders that will lead to the grinning. It's brilliant. By the way, notice in the entire text of the prophet, we have no passage called on killing or on murder in the prophet, but we'll have it here. Now, that's some pretty harsh stuff. It's going to challenge us to think about these comfortable lives that we're privileged to live at this point in our technological rise. And then the word but. Notice what he calls you guys. Children of space. What a great line. In other words, we need our space. We need our ability, for us, of course, to go out into the badlands and to there be reminded of we are children of space. We're wanderers by nature. But you, children of space, you restless in rest, you shall not be trapped nor tamed. Your house shall not be an anchor, but a mast. What a brilliant line. In other words, don't allow technologies to fasten you down the way an anchor would. We would drop it for a ship, but rather the mast, which what? Holds the sails, which what? Allows us to travel. In other words, I don't think that Gibran is actually anti-technology. I think what he is challenging us to have is a more integral view that says, use technologies, don't let them use you, right? It shall not be your technology a glistening film that covers a wound, but an eyelid that guards the eye. You remember in Song of Myself 46 of Walt Whitman's, right? Now I remove the gum from your eyes, you must have it yourself to the dazzle of the light. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net on this passage, but the idea is that learning to see the value and the preciousness of your life, technologies sometimes, not always, but sometimes can keep us from that. You shall not fold your wings. This is a beautiful line. Think about the power of seeing you as a bird or even an angel. You shall not fold your wings that you may pass through doors, nor bend your heads that they may strike not against the ceiling, nor fear to breathe lest walls should crack and fall down. I love his irony. I love his the hyperbolic nature. You know, it's obviously overstated. In other words, when you build these things, they can fall in on you. The great Ken Wilber, the integral, says the higher that we climb, the more the ladder sways. As we evolve in our technological advancements, we got to be careful. These houses that we build, obviously now we're speaking metaphorically of technology in general, it can have an undue effect. I mean, as we now move into the brave new world era of AI and all of that, we're obviously excited about it on one level, but on the other side, we're familiar with Shelley's Frankenstein at 3A, no question, and you'll remember that Frankenstein ain't the monster that the Dr. Frankenstein creates, right? We create the very monster that maybe causes us the issues. You shall not dwell in tombs made by the dead for the living. That's a compelling line. And go back to those that idea that Christ will share in Matthew 23 about tombs. And though of magnificence and splendor, your house shall not hold your secret nor shelter your longing. I think this is a brilliant insight. This is one of the more amazing poems of the prophet because we're working with metaphor here. I mean, obviously he's talking about houses and dwellings, right? But what he's really, I think, sharing with you guys especially, because you guys live in the houses that are, for the most part, appropriated to and for you. The real challenge is, how do you live alongside technology? How can you allow it to be a part of your life, but not to be the complete part of your life? Why? Because there is a secret that can't be somehow sheltered from and through these technologies. For that which is boundless in you abides in the mansion of the sky, whose door is the morning mist and whose windows are the songs and the silences of night. Now, again, those of us who are poets long for just one moment in our creative life when we can write one line like that. What are we going to do with a set of lines like this at 2A? Well, I think the argument is that we are children of space. We're wanderers by nature, and we mustn't let luxuries, technological luxuries, get in the way of that. The goal is to, of course, be natural within a world where, obviously, there's a whole lot of technology. In other words, we got to find a plot of grass, and we got to lay back and enjoy it. Of course, as Voltaire will say at the conclusion of Candide, we must cultivate our own garden, right? Cultivate our own garden. At 2B, I love the power of the word picture and the word choices, grinning, murder. These are interesting ideas. To what degree is your technology grinning at you as in, ha ha, I've caught you, I've captured you? It's an amazing insight. At 3A, I mean, there's so many titles that I mentioned in this lecture. I come back to, of course, Plato's Republic, the dangers of luxuries as he will articulate them there, and of course, ultimately, the need for doctors because we live such undisciplined lives. Thoreau's Walden obviously comes to mind as well. A man is rich in proportion to the things he can live without. Simplify, simplify, simplify. Go back to those lectures at learnstrong.net. Every year, at least once, we should read all the poems of the prophet, but I would argue as well, let's read a few lines from Thoreau's Walden to remind us of what really matters in our lives, especially as it relates to this issue of technology. Finally, at 3B, well, what are you going to do? I mean, this is some pretty powerful, direct-to-you kind of language. What are you going to do with a set of lines like this? For example, do you consider yourself a wanderer? You'll remember that Tolkien says all who wander are not lost. Do you consider yourself a wanderer? And that's maybe why you love reading texts like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and the like. How about this one? About your living space, specifically the house that you live in, your living space. Does it represent you well? And at times, do you feel like maybe it makes sense to escape the trappings of technology and find the freedom that would be beyond it? Well, from houses and the technology that's understood through houses, we'll move now on to clothes and then finally buying and selling. And these three poems taken collectively, man, they're going to challenge us. At least I hope they are. Thank you.